On the night of March 8, 2014, the world was asleep while history quietly broke apart at 35,000 feet above the Earth. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, a Boeing 777 carrying 239 passengers and crew, departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport with no hint that it was about to become the most baffling aviation mystery ever recorded. The aircraft was modern, well-maintained, and flown by an experienced crew. The weather was calm. The flight plan was ordinary. Nothing, absolutely nothing, suggested that this journey would end without a destination, without wreckage, and without answers. As the aircraft climbed into the dark sky, passengers settled into the familiar rhythm of long-haul travel. Some slept, some watched movies, some stared out of windows at a black ocean reflecting distant stars. Inside the cockpit, routine procedures were followed with professional calm. At 1:19 a.m. local time, the co-pilot delivered what would later become the most haunting sentence in modern aviation history. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Seconds later, the aircraft vanished from civilian radar. In a world saturated with satellites, GPS tracking, and real-time communication, disappearance should be impossible. And yet MH370 did not explode, did not send a distress signal, and did not fall from the sky in a fiery catastrophe visible from the ground. Instead, it simply slipped away, quietly, deliberately, and invisibly. For nearly 6 hours after losing contact, the aircraft continued flying. This single fact would later transform the investigation from a search and rescue mission into a psychological, technological, and geopolitical puzzle unlike anything seen before. Military radar soon revealed something disturbing. MH370 had turned back. It crossed Malaysia, flew over the Andaman Sea, and headed southwest into the vast emptiness of the Indian Ocean. This was not the behavior of a damaged aircraft struggling to survive. It was the movement of a plane under control. Someone, or something, was guiding it. The implications were chilling. As hours passed and the aircraft failed to arrive in Beijing, confusion turned into panic. Air traffic controllers scrambled. Airlines alerted authorities. Families gathered at airports, staring at arrival boards that never changed. Governments launched emergency responses, but even then, no one understood what they were chasing. Was the aircraft hijacked? Was it a catastrophic systems failure? Or was it something far darker, an intentional act hidden behind the mask of routine aviation? Days turned into weeks as the search expanded across oceans. Early debris sightings proved false. Satellite images teased investigators with floating objects that vanished upon closer inspection. Meanwhile, Inmarsat satellite data quietly told a different story, one not of sudden disaster, but of endurance. The aircraft had continued flying until fuel exhaustion, sending automated handshake signals to space long after human voices had gone silent. These satellite pings became the backbone of the investigation, drawing a massive arc across the Indian Ocean known as the Seventh Arc, the final line where the aircraft could have run out of fuel and fallen into the sea. It was along this invisible boundary that the largest underwater search in aviation history began. Ships scanned endless stretches of ocean. Autonomous vehicles descended into crushing darkness. Billions of dollars were spent mapping the seabed. And yet, year after year, the ocean gave nothing back. No fuselage, no wings, no engines, just silence. By 2018, the official search was suspended. The world was told the mystery might never be solved. But this is not where the story ends. Because some mysteries refuse to stay buried. Even as governments stepped away, independent researchers stepped forward. Engineers, pilots, mathematicians, and oceanographers, many working without funding, began reanalyzing the data. They questioned assumptions that had gone unchallenged for years. They revisited satellite timing errors. They rebuilt drift models using debris locations confirmed on African coastlines. And slowly, a troubling possibility emerged. The search may have been focused in the wrong place. Not by thousands of kilometers, but by just enough to miss the truth entirely. At the same time, technology marched forward. Deep-sea drones became smarter. Sonar resolution sharpened. Artificial intelligence entered ocean mapping. What once looked like noise could now be identified as wreckage. What once required years could now be done in months. The ocean had not changed, but humanity's ability to read it had. And so the question returned, louder than ever. What if MH370 was always just beyond our reach? This question, simple yet devastating, is the reason the search was restarted. Not because the world suddenly remembered MH370, but because the evidence never stopped evolving. When the official search for MH370 was suspended in 2018, many believed the case had reached a dead end. Governments quietly stepped back, press conferences stopped, and the global media slowly moved on to newer tragedies. On paper, the mystery was labeled unsolved, a polite term that masked a deeper reality: the ocean had won. Or at least, that was the story the world was told. Behind closed doors, however, the data never stopped being studied. The silence surrounding MH370 was not the silence of resolution, it was the silence of uncertainty. At the heart of the renewed search lies a simple but unsettling truth: the original search assumptions may have been flawed. Not careless, not incompetent, but limited by the technology and understanding available at the time. In 2014, investigators were forced to rely on satellite handshake data never before used to locate a missing aircraft. These Inmarsat signals were never designed for tracking planes, they were mere acknowledgements, digital pings, confirming the aircraft's communication system was still powered. From these faint signals, analysts constructed arcs across the Indian Ocean, estimating where the plane might have been when each ping was sent. The most critical of these was the seventh arc, the final known handshake before fuel exhaustion. For years, this arc defined the search area. Entire missions were planned around it. Billions of dollars were spent scanning its depths. But what if the arc itself was never wrong, only incomplete? What if small timing errors, speed assumptions, or altitude variations shifted the probable crash site tens of kilometers beyond the zones that were searched? Independent researchers began asking these questions long after the official investigation had moved on. Using open-source data, refined mathematics, and updated flight dynamics models, they reran the numbers from scratch. Some assumed controlled flight until fuel exhaustion. Others modeled steep dives or glide scenarios. What emerged was not chaos, but convergence. Different models, built independently, began pointing toward a narrower, more southerly region of the Indian Ocean, an area either barely searched or not searched at all. At the same time, oceanographers revisited debris drift studies. By 2016, confirmed fragments of MH370 had been found on the shores of Réunion Island, Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania. These pieces told a quiet but crucial story. They did not drift randomly. Ocean currents follow patterns, and when reverse-modeled using updated data, those patterns pointed back, not to the original search zone, but to a region further south and west. The debris was not contradicting the satellite data. It was refining it. This convergence of satellite analysis and ocean drift modeling became one of the strongest arguments for restarting the search. For the first time, the evidence was no longer scattered across competing theories. It was aligning. Another key factor was the advancement of deep-sea search technology. During the original search, autonomous underwater vehicles were already impressive but limited. Battery life was shorter, sonar resolution was coarser, image analysis depended heavily on human operators scanning endless seabed photos, a slow, exhausting process prone to fatigue and error. Today, the situation is entirely different. Modern AUVs can stay submerged longer, travel farther, and scan the ocean floor with near photographic precision. Artificial intelligence systems can now analyze sonar images at scale, flagging anomalies that would once have been dismissed as noise. In other words, the ocean floor has not changed, but our ability to read it has. Then came the private sector. Unlike government-funded missions bound by political constraints and public scrutiny, private companies approached the problem with a different mindset. Some proposed no fine, no fee agreements, placing the financial risk on themselves rather than taxpayers. This was not charity, it was confidence. These firms believed the data had matured to the point where success was no longer a gamble, it was a calculation. Their proposals were not based on hope, but on years of quiet preparation. Updated bathymetric maps, reprocessed satellite logs, cross-validated drift simulations, all pointed toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. MH370 was likely just outside the areas that had already been searched. Yet data alone does not restart a global search. Human pressure does. For the families of the 239 passengers and crew, the suspension of the search was never acceptable. To them, MH370 was not an abstract puzzle, it was an absence that defined their lives. Without wreckage, there was no certainty. Without certainty, there was no closure. Every birthday missed, every unanswered phone call, every theory published without proof reopened the wound. Over time, these families became advocates, researchers, and voices that refused to fade into the background. They challenged official statements. They demanded transparency. They supported independent investigations. And slowly, their persistence ensured that MH370 remained a question the world could not fully ignore. Governments, too, began to reconsider. Aviation authorities understood that MH370 represented a systemic failure, not just of tracking technology, but of assumptions. The disappearance exposed gaps in global aircraft monitoring, cockpit security protocols, and crisis response coordination. Until the aircraft is found, those gaps remain theoretical risks. Finding MH370 is not only about explaining the past, it is about protecting the future. This is why the search was restarted. Not because the mystery is fashionable again. Not because technology magically guarantees success, but because the weight of evidence has shifted. What once looked like speculation now looks like probability. What once seemed impossible now looks achievable. And somewhere, far beneath the surface of the Indian Ocean, the truth still waits, unchanged, untouched, and patient. If MH370 is finally found, it will not simply close a case, it will reopen history. The wreckage, resting somewhere in the cold darkness of the southern Indian Ocean, is not just twisted metal and broken systems. It is a frozen moment in time, preserved by depth and pressure, waiting to explain what no theory, simulation, or assumption ever could. Every fragment of that aircraft carries information. Every fracture tells a story. And together, they form the final testimony of a flight that refused to be forgotten. The most critical answers lie not in speculation, but in physics. The position of the fuselage, the separation of wings, the condition of the engines, all of it would reveal how MH370 met its end. A controlled descent would leave a different signature than a high-speed dive. A glide after fuel exhaustion would scatter debris differently than an uncontrolled spiral. Even the angle at which the aircraft struck the ocean surface could confirm whether someone was still attempting to fly it in the final moments. These are not guesses. These are measurable facts. Facts that only the wreckage can provide. The black boxes, if recovered, would speak with devastating clarity. The cockpit voice recorder would capture the human dimension of the final hours, silence or conversation, calm or tension, routine or crisis. The flight data recorder would preserve the aircraft's last heartbeat, altitude changes, control inputs, system states, and speed. Together, they would transform a decade of uncertainty into a timeline of truth. For investigators, this data would be invaluable. For the families, it would be everything. Yet MH370 is not only about how a plane crashed. It is about why modern aviation allowed a plane to vanish at all. The disappearance exposed a dangerous illusion, that constant connectivity meant constant visibility. In reality, vast regions of the world's oceans remained digital blind spots. MH370 forced the industry to confront this weakness. As a direct result, global aircraft tracking standards changed. Satellite-based monitoring systems were improved. Emergency tracking protocols were strengthened. MH370 became the silent catalyst for reforms that now protect millions of passengers every day. Still, reform without resolution feels incomplete. The search for MH370 has been restarted because unanswered questions erode trust. Aviation depends on confidence. Confidence that systems work, that safeguards exist, and that failures are understood rather than buried. Until MH370 is found, a shadow remains over long-haul flight, not because flying is unsafe, but because one event escaped explanation. Finding the aircraft would restore balance. It would reaffirm that no disaster, no matter how complex, is beyond investigation. There is also a deeper human reason. For the families, time has not healed anything. Time has only stretched the waiting. Without a confirmed crash site, grief remains suspended. never fully beginning, never fully ending. The restart of the search is an acknowledgement that their loss still matters. That their loved ones were not just numbers on a manifest, but individuals whose final journey deserves to be understood. And then there is the world itself. The observers, the analysts, the quiet witnesses who followed the story for years. MH370 captured global attention because it challenged something fundamental, our belief that technology has conquered uncertainty. The disappearance reminded us that the Earth is still vast, the oceans still deep, and human behavior still unpredictable. Restarting the search is not an admission of failure, it is an expression of humility. Somewhere in the darkness, the aircraft lies exactly where it fell. It has not moved. It has not changed its story. Only our ability to find it has evolved. Whether the renewed search succeeds or not, its significance is already clear. It proves that the pursuit of truth does not expire. That mysteries are not forgotten simply because they are difficult. And that even in a world mapped by satellites and algorithms, there is still room for perseverance, curiosity, and moral responsibility. MH370 is not just a missing plane. It is a reminder, a warning, and a promise. A warning that certainty can vanish without notice. And a promise that humanity will keep searching. Not because it is easy, but because some questions demand answers.